Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick Rooney, and I am the founder of QUEsocial. And before I jump in, Bryan, why don't I turn it over to you just to say hello to everybody?
Thanks, Patrick. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining. And a little bit about me. I recently moved from sunny Austin, Texas to sunny San Francisco. So I recently started at Twilio, and Twilio is actually a platform for developers to embed communications in everything that they build. What that means is when you get an Uber text that says your driver's 3 minutes away, they're doing that with Twilio. So I manage employer brand and sourcing for Twilio, and I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Well, everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. We'll be talking about content strategy and how to convert that into actual outcomes and engagement. And, content strategy is a question that I get a lot from our clients, and I know it's something that Bryan, puts in place every day. And so for this webcast, Bryan and I will be tag teaming for the discussion. I'll outline a framework really for content strategy and converting it into referrals, candidates, and applicants. And Bryan then will provide real-world examples that you can use to bring the framework that I'm going to outline to life. In a practical sense, you can think of it as Patrick will do the play-by-play, and Bryan will provide the far more interesting and fun color commentary. So let's get into it. The old adage that content is king hasn't changed. In fact, I think it's more apt now than ever. It's content everywhere, all the time. So that leaves us then with the content conundrum. We know content drives social media, and content is the vehicle to reach your audience. It's the vehicle to deliver your employer brand message, and even for establishing yourself and your team apart from everybody else. But then if everybody is creating content and fighting for attention, and up front, I will acknowledge the irony that even this webinar falls into that content pool. At what point will we have a complete and absolute saturation? And when that happens, how do we then reach those audiences that we need to get to? How do we deliver our message? How do we set ourselves apart? And so this really is the content conundrum that we're facing. And we might not be that far from the point of saturation. There are so many statistics out there to choose from. You can almost take your pick. But here are a couple just to think about. The average person consumes 10 hours of content every day. Think about that. Think about 10 hours of your day. That's 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. of content. Now, even if this is 10, 20, even 50% off, think about the sheer amount of content that people are consuming. When in the world do we have time for anything else? When do we break free? And when we do break free, we only retweet 1 out of every 318 tweets. Right? That's a very low level of engagement. So basically, of all that content, of everything that's going on, there's not much interaction. There's no meaningful back and forth. And then the average Facebook post then only gets shared 0.5%. That's a minuscule amount. And we're not slowing down. In fact, we're really speeding up. In the next 5 years, research shows that we're going to see a 500% increase in information on the web. So the reality is that the supply of content is overwhelming the much smaller demand.
And just so you'll know, Patrick, I think that's actually going to get better, and then it's going to get worse, and then it's going to get better again, because the market is expanding and contracting. So as much as it feels like we're overwhelmed by the content right now, it will contract again, and we'll actually get into more and more splinters of different types of content. So just my own personal theory.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, the tools and technologies at disseminating the information, at filtering the information are getting better as well. And so I think that that's absolutely right. But then, with all of that, though, with that onslaught, the obvious question then is, how do we break through the tedium? How do we break through the tsunami of content to actually be effective, right? We're organizations, we're talent acquisition. How are we going to reach our candidates? How are we going to break through this to deliver our information, to shape our brand, right, to attract the people that we want to attract? Now, everybody, Bryan and I, we don't claim to have all the answers, certainly, but we can share with you some of the approaches and best practices that we've learned over the years, and that's exactly what this discussion is all about. And, sorry, Bryan, did you want to say something?
No, you're good.
So I'm going to start with a story about one of our clients. It's somebody that you certainly would recognize and you have likely been a customer of. This company hires a huge volume of people every year, and they need to constantly refresh their talent pool. Now, I can't tell you their name, but I share this only to show you that content can drive actual engagement and conversion. We recently had a quarterly business review with them, and the results are really interesting. In addition to their career pages and talent communities, their outcomes were a large result because they activated the recruiters to share their content to their social networks. But here's the outcome of what they saw. They were able to increase their reach beyond their Facebook pages, beyond their content communities by 70,000 people. In Q2 alone of this year, they actually grew that number by 20% organically. They shared 325 pieces of content, more than 15,000 times to Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And then, of that, they generated nearly 21,000 clicks. Now, from a marketing perspective, that's 8,400,000 impressions. It had a 0.25% click-through rate, which is about average, really, for content marketing. But then they had an earned media value of $76,000 in one quarter by creating a smart content strategy. The more important of this, though, is that they actually had 123 talent acquisition wins, and that's defined as more than a dozen referrals, candidates, handful of hires. So they are actually able to use their content to actually convert into outcomes. So, of course, the question is, how did they do that? So there are a number of things that they put in place. The first is that they gave people a compelling reason to interact with them. They had content that was specific and unique enough to their audience that it resonated with them. It spoke directly to them. And then the second thing that they did was they pointed them in a direction to interact more deeply, whether that was to learn more about the story, learn more about the company, learn more about jobs or career opportunities. The point was that they actually pointed them in a direction, whether that was on social or their talent community or on their careers page. And then the third part of that,
with a goal, right? Pointing them in that direction with a goal, I think, is probably the top point to make, because there are a lot of people who realize that this is important, and they start doing it before they realize what the end goal is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other part that they put in place was that they used a number of different channels. Right? They used social media. They used their talent band properties. They used mobile, and then they used their ambassadors. And there was some experimentation. They didn't, of course, set out to develop this fully integrated recruitment marketing program, but rather, the outcome was a process of experimentation, and they found what was working for them and then working for their audience. So the reason why they put social at the middle of their program, it was a very good reason, because 79% of job seekers use social media in their job search. And this is an interesting stat. 86% of people in the first 10 years of their career use social media in searching for a job. Not only that, but, they needed to, this is an organization that hires a lot of millennials. And they knew that in order to reach millennials, they had to be able to use social media effectively. And if they weren't going to, then, use social media, then they wouldn't be able to attract them. And if they couldn't attract them, they couldn't hire them. And of course, if they couldn't hire them, then they had a real business problem, not a recruiting problem. They also knew that the mobile. I think the stats are out there. I think that the verdict is in that mobile is really important. People are using mobile to search for jobs. But what astonishes me is that up to 90% of Fortune 500 career sites don't support mobile. And Bryan, I don't know if you have a perspective on this, but given the onslaught of the demand for mobile, that's really surprising.
Yeah, I think the importance of mobile can't be understated. I think in our circles, in recruiting, talent acquisition, everybody's heard of mobile being drummed about a lot. But one of the things that one of the stories I always share when someone says, hey, are we really seeing all that traffic on mobile? And all you have to ask is, well, okay, you've got the system set up so that people can get job alerts. Well, if 89% of the people are checking their email notifications on mobile, well, when they click that link to look at a job or to look at content that you're sharing, if 90% of the people don't have a good experience, what does that say about how recruiting and talent acquisition views that user experience, right? So it's thinking differently about not just, we need mobile because we have to have this app or we have to be able to do this thing that's the shiny object, but really functionally who's accessing the content on mobile. And I think that will make a point to everyone in leadership because they do it themselves. They're the ones who are checking their email on their tablet, on their phone.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it goes back to knowing your audience and knowing how they how they use different technologies and different sites. So going back to our client, the reason why they were able to achieve such great success was that they also knew the power of their employee voices. They knew that employees are their most trusted advocates. And the ambassador's part is really important because it's your employees who are connected to the people that you want to reach. And the Edelman Trust Barometer over the past few years has done a great job of highlighting just how important employees are in terms of credibility and trust, far more than the CEO or far more than anything that the company can do. And the fact is that if you have quality people, you want to reach and hire people just like them. It's the birds of a feather flock together analogy. Software engineers are connected to software engineers, and so on. So word of mouth is increasingly important. It's been for a long time a central theme in marketing, and is gaining steam in recruitment marketing as people increasingly turn to employees who work at the company, i.e. Glassdoor. But they turn to their friends, they turn to employees, they turn to people that they trust for guidance. And the stats, are pretty stark. All right, this first stat here hasn't changed in more than 10 years. That 90+% of people say that the recommendation of a friend, family, or trusted source has far more credibility than anything that the company can say. 70% of millennials say that they hear about companies through friends or job boards. 80% of millennials look for people and culture with a culture fit within employers. So I think that, you can read these. The power of word of mouth is kind of universal. I mean, think about your own lives, right? I mean, you listen to the people that are closest to you, people that you respect, people that you know. So despite that, only 47% of less than half of companies fold word of mouth into their outreach efforts. And when you're trying to attract quality candidates, the word and the experience and testimonial of your employees is absolutely gold.
And I got to tell you, Patrick, that's one of the things that I learned really early on. I've changed recruiting environments from larger organizations to almost a 500-person startup in the Bay Area. And one of the things I learned really quickly was that people are very particular about how their voice is portrayed. So having a message about the voice coming from on high not only is less relevant, less appealing to your external audience, your prospective talent, but it also resonates less with your internal audience, your employees, the ones who are motivated to share this information.
Yeah, that's right. So I think that the old adage that content is king, but it's not just content is king; it's also the currency of social media. This is what content is. The engine that drives social, and it's what establishes interest in you. It's what establishes your credibility. It establishes you and your team as trusted resources, or not. Right? It could go the other way. But great content buys mindshare. It buys attention. It buys thought leadership. And once you have that, it's something that you have earned. But to get there, if it's if you're going to rise above the droning, above the blah 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 of the other 9 hours and 59 minutes of content that the average person takes in every day, right? If you're going to rise above that, then it's got to be a handful of things, right? It's got to be relevant to your audience and resonate with them, right? It's got to be interesting enough to capture and to keep their attention. You can't just share. You can't just throw things out on in your network, or you can't throw things up that is going to have no consequence for your audience, or you're going to lose them.
That makes me think of the teacher on Charlie Brown, right? When someone's talking and it's really just ends up being noise. The wah 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 wah, which is what a lot of brands or a lot of companies, recruiting organizations, big and small, end up putting out there because they haven't thoroughly baked the goal of that content. I definitely agree.
Yeah, that's right. And like Charlie Brown's teacher, I mean, if I didn't find that particularly interesting. Some might, but it certainly wasn't useful. And so your content has got to be useful enough to make them better at something. Right? There's got to be some utility for them. Shareable, right? You want the ultimate goal of anybody's content is to go viral, right? I mean, you hear about videos, you hear about viral videos. Well, there's no such thing as viral videos. You don't create viral videos. You create a video that goes viral, and the reason why it goes viral is because it's very interesting, it's super funny, it's very relevant, right? It has things that speak to people. But you don't keep, and that's the objective, right? You want it to be shared. But for talent acquisition, also we need to make sure that it's actionable, right? Bryan, I think, summed it up really well earlier. Right? It's got to have a purpose, right? It's got to be actionable enough that they can either they can apply it to their life, or it has some other purpose for you, right? It's going to be actionable in terms of we're going to drive them to a career side, or we're going to drive them someplace that we want to continue the conversation with them. Anything to add on that, Bryan?
Yeah, I think that the actionable piece is really key. I think there are certain circumstances where you can have occasionally content for content's sake, like a Happy Friday post or an interesting video that ties back into your audience or your company somehow without a goal of without a goal of that kind of conversion, right? There are use cases for that, but in and of itself, that's still a goal. The conversation is a goal. And so I think knowing what that goal is, what that conversion looks like for every piece of content that you put out there and have it map back, I think that's really the key. So that not only is it fun content, but it also serves a purpose. And a lot of that I discover by connecting with the recruiters within the organization and asking them what information they put out there or what information they start their recruiting conversations with. So that's a piece of how we get our goals here at Twilio.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that as you look at these things, I think that these are general guidelines, as any of these things are. But it's important to have a good mix, right? It can't just all be it can't all be actionable, right? Of course, but it's got to be when you're thinking about your content strategy and you're putting a plan in place, you've got to have a good mix of content that speaks to different levels of your audience. And and with each of these, a good healthy part of that content mix. But I do want to reiterate. I mean, this is such an important point that I'm going to reiterate it. Content must be targeted and it must be relevant to your audiences. What I often see is people are just sharing content just to share content, and it may not be really relevant for their audiences. If you're a recruiter, you want to share content with the people that you're trying to recruit. Right? If you're trying to reach somebody, you've got to speak to him or her. You've got to give them content that means something. And I love this image because most software developers can't cook. So why share that fabulous buttercream frosting recipe with them? And it would fall on deaf ears.
Just for future reference, Patrick, I am not a developer, but I would love that recipe for fabulous.
It'll be in the follow-up notes to this webinar. So, if you think about the content that you respond to, think about the content that leaves an impression on you, and it causes you to take the next step to learn more, or encourage you to engage more deeply. Right? Your response it's no coincidence. The content that is most successful has a number of traits. 1, it evokes passion. 2, it inspires purpose. 3, there's the promise of potential. So what does that mean? So it evokes passion, right? It shows the soul of the person or the company or the experience. It kind of, it's the beating heart or the true north of a company. Inspires purpose, right? It ties to some fundamental urge that we all have to be part of something great. It triggers something within us that we identify with at the very core of who we are. It has a promise of potential, right? It inspires us to something larger and satisfies some ambition that we need, right? So great content, has one of these or more of these characteristics. Now, again, to the point that we just, to the conversation we just had, not all content has to be all about this, right? There's nothing wrong with having just some fun, silly, mindless Friday afternoon stuff. But if we're going to establish thought leadership, if we're going to establish a mind share within our audience, then we've got to reach some core part of them that is fundamental. So, all of this said, great content then goes beyond a transactional read, right? It's just not content for the sake of content, but it taps into something larger about who we are. Bryan, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's keeping an underlying aspirational tone in mind, because we want to get beyond the 9 to 5. We want to think about, or most people want to think about what they're doing and the effect it's going to have. So aspirational meaning I'm really excited about what I'm doing, not just because I've never done it before or it's a cool thing, but because it's really helping me grow and helping other people while I'm at it, serving a purpose, right? An aspirational higher purpose. So I definitely get that, and I think that figuring out the times of day as well as the days of the week to do that, and the busiest job search day of the week is Monday. No surprise there. In the evening, after people are in the shock of back to work, and they've come home and they're like, do I really want to come back to this? So thinking about how you can keep those fires burning and rolling it into your content.
Yeah, I think that's right, and and then just position that again. There's been a ton of research about what makes people actually engage and what makes them click. And I'm forgetting the other two, but the number one was content that's funny, right? And so, of course, we can't have all content that is evoking passion or inspiring purpose, or right. But if we can create a content strategy that pulls in different parts of these, right, that is aspirational while being funny, right? And I don't know what that would look like, but all of this is a way of saying that there are no hard and fast rules with this, but there are some common elements here that you should keep in mind as you're thinking about the type of content that you're wanting to curate or create on your own. And speaking of that, right? Speaking of creating or curating, one of the big reasons that our clients are so successful with content marketing is that the content isn't all about them. In fact, a lot of times they tell their story through third-party content, using content that's aligned with their core values. It's reflective of work experiences. It's reflective or aligned with their culture. And then there's sprinkled in a good smattering of good employer brand content, right? Employees talking about how great their company is, all the great things that they're doing, the awesome culture, and then only then, sharing a very few job postings. Because a couple of years ago, I think what we saw was there was this automated job posting that recruiters were just sending out job postings and spamming their networks. And I think that what we found was that people tune out to that. But it can be part of a good solid content mix. And so we recommend starting with a 60-30-10 ratio, with 60% of third-party content, cold and curated from respected sources, 30% brand content, employer brand content, telling your employer brand story, and then 10% of jobs. And then you can, once you get into it, you can see what's working and what's not, and then calibrate from there. Bryan, what's the mix that you guys use there at Twilio, and what have you seen to be effective?
It's actually a little bit different than that. I think it's a good place to start, the 60-30-10 rule, because you don't know how your audience is going to react. It's a little bit like playing poker. You don't know what moves people are going to make until you put your cards on the table. So, or shall we say, make a bet. So I think that's a good place to start. But I think the two things to keep in mind are that it really depends on, number one, if you have a good reliable source of third-party information, and then what you really define as brand, and making sure that brand is not just, hey, here's the content that we're creating as a company to tell the message and the story that we want to tell. But brand for us at Twilio is by and large the story that the employees are telling. And so we may take up a third of that 30% with company produced content, and it's really just us trying to capture and tell the story of what the employees are already doing. So for us, the jobs piece is actually has been about 10 to 15% on channels like Facebook and Instagram, but when there are channels like Twitter where you can share a lot more information. There's a lot of real-time conversation going on. So sharing more information about different things and making sure they're tagged properly and timed properly, you can go a lot higher than the 10% on jobs. And in fact, the funny part is if you have the right message out there, not just that you've got a job, but if you have the message out there of here's the common misconception around this role, and here's what's different about the job here at Twilio. And we actually had a tweet go out last night with something similar to that that got us almost 10 new specifically targeted followers in the developer realm. So our clients are largely developer-based because we're an API platform, which means developers are not only our customers, but they're also our prospects. So sharing the right information out there and keeping your channel in mind are really, really key. But again, you won't know what the right mix is for you until you put your cards on the table.
Yeah, that's right. One of the most common questions we get about content is, where do we get it? We don't have a lot of content. We don't have the right resources. We don't have access to content that marketing has. It can be an intimidating and overwhelming thought, right? But if you think about it, you have way more than you think. You can even create organic content, like with what Bryan was talking about. They have a hashtag around Twilio Life, I think it is. Is that right, Bryan?
That's right.
And
that's content specifically from employees. So when we capture a story, when we shoot a video, those kinds of things, and also when someone's just sharing a picture of something that they're working on, that's all relevant part of the hashtag that we use. It's Twilio Life.
Yeah, and so there's a vast amount of opportunities for you internally. If you look internally, employee-generated content. You have an entire company working to give you content. You can even start with looking at your news section for something that your company has done in the community, or an award or some milestone. Anything that would make somebody think, hey, that's a cool company, I can see myself working there. But even if it's as simple as activating your employees, ask five employees to interview 3 of their peers about the great things that go on in your company. Everybody has a video on their phone now, right? So ask 5 of them to interview 3 people. You now have weeks and weeks. You have 15 pieces of content right there to work with. But then going back to the 60-30-10 ratio, third-party content can be really valuable on a number of levels. One, it can save time. You don't have to go out and produce it. You don't have to do anything. You can just can capture it. But it can also, if you find the right content, it can tell your story, through other people's content. And there are tools like Feedly or Flipboard, or there are industry sites that you can sign up for news feeds from that allow you to curate or gather content around a specific topic that you can share. And then adding your own commentary or editorial allows you to almost co-opt content and in some way own it.
Yeah, I would say that RSS, the RSS function, is one of my friends as an employer brand content curator. So looking at channels, paying attention to where the audience is liking, commenting, retweeting, or resharing content, and paying attention to those sources, and then really plugging into the RSS feed for news, even if it's just that specific topic on the news channel, I think is really beneficial. And 2 other pieces where I think you can grab some good content are, number one, search for hashtags that people are using. Now, a lot of times people will use a hashtag with your company name. So one of the first things that I did was I started searching on the Twilio hashtag because, people weren't guided. They were just doing what was organic, what felt right at the time. So going through a lot of that content gave me, number one, reshareable content, but it also let me know who within the organization was active, how they were sharing, and what was more important to them. And then the second area is getting in touch with internal PR or marketing. Every week we get an email with here's where the company was in the news. And not only that, but here are the thoughts around it. Here's what our competitors are doing, things like that. So that's really helpful. And most likely, if it's a modern PR or marketing organization, they've got some kind of function or at least a place where you can go and grab that information.
Good. So we've been talking about content, but we're not talking content for the sake of content. We have a purpose, and we want specific things from this content. So, I say this a lot. Content is nothing but fodder. Right? It is a tool to open a larger conversation, a larger discussion. It's a tool to enable your recruiters to reach out to somebody specifically and say, hey, here's some content I was thinking about you. Would love to talk about it more. But it's also an opportunity to drive larger interaction. So tying in a call to action, either to join the talent community or apply for a job, or simply to follow your social channels. We call this FJA, follow, join, apply, but whatever you call it or wherever you send them, add a link to encourage readers to go deeper. And Bryan, I know you have some thoughts on this as well.
I do, and I look at those three different things: the follow, join, apply, as you mentioned, as ways for people to buy in, and it usually starts with the social affinity piece, the follow, right? So the social affinity over time leads to them joining your talent community, and your talent community could be whatever method you have of curating content and connecting people. It could be a LinkedIn group. It could be an actual talent community where people can connect with each other and learn more about the organization. So social affinity over time turns into some kind of talent community or network membership. That's them opting in, raising their hand and saying, hey, I'm okay with having some kind of a recruiting conversation with you at some point, right? And then from there, it really moves into a matter of timing. Everyone's buy cycle is different. They're thinking about their goals, the things that they want to achieve at that particular company, in that particular role, and there are definitely there are breaks in that where logic is kind of thrown out the window, but by and large, they're thinking about what timing is right for them. And that timing could be, I've had a really crappy day at the office. I want to look for a job. Or the timing could be, I'm up for review and I'm not getting the feedback that I need, or I know I'm not going to get the promotion or the career advancement that I'm looking for. And the other thing could just be, hey, I've been trying to keep my eye out for a specific role, and I just got a notification because I'm a member of this talent community, or I've signed up for job alerts. I just got this notification that this role just opened up. And that driver for them, from a timing perspective, is enough for them to take that next step and apply. And a lot of what you see out there from a content perspective is really only based on the immediate superficial social indicators and applying to a job. Because we look at it from a recruiting mindset and we think, well, either they've applied for the job or they haven't. And then if they haven't applied for a job, do I want them to apply for the job? We're very goal-oriented, which makes sense, but it also doesn't line up with how we think about our careers and those decisions from the end user perspective. So those are my thoughts around how those three goals line up. But figuring out your goal based on the content is really key. and the conversion, right? I want to apply to this job. Oh, okay. Well, if that's your conversion level, keep in mind there are different kinds of conversion. Then great. Now this is good content. It applies to the people who are ready to move forward. Their timing is now or relatively soon, right? So as you can see here, the piece of content talks about a hiring event, and who would be compelled to come to the hiring event? Who am I going to meet at the hiring event? This is specifically geared towards people who are ready to have a recruiting-related conversation. And so these are important. They're critical to put out there so that you can capture the people who are ready. And keep in mind that conversion is not the only type of conversion. The other type of content that you'll see out there outside of conversion, outside of apply to this job, if you can go to the next slide, is the type of content that really focuses on creating that conversation, unearthing the reasons why, getting people's opinion, because the end result is not necessarily them applying to a job, but it's them understanding how to process your presence as an employer. To think, okay, you're not just in it for what I can give to you right now. You actually want to share something that's about your culture, or share a piece of news, or get feedback, have that interaction. And as you can see here, one of our developers at Twilio actually got featured in the San Francisco Chronicle for being a fashion-forward developer. And we talked about there being so much content being manufactured by our organizations. You can't make this stuff up. You just have to know how to listen. And so sharing that piece of content highlighted an employee, and then let them know, not only does it say programming language, Python and Ruby, but it talks about, okay, where does this person work? What do they work on? And so it gives them information without asking for that immediate buy-in that the person might not be ready for. So the conversation content as well as conversion content. Now the big question as you're looking at the results is going beyond the anecdotal stories of, oh, hey, somebody saw this and clicked on a link, or I think maybe they saw the post on Facebook. Well, the story that I like to tell really nails back to comparing the conversion and the conversation content. Well, when I ran a study of 90 days with a lot of different kinds of content, I looked at, okay, what works between the two different types. And conversion, which is still good, got just over 2 clicks per post. And the conversation actually got over 50% higher response rate. So the funny thing about that is, not only are you getting more response rates, but the people in their networks that are seeing them like, comment, post, the people are actually seeing those actions, and gives you raised visibility to their entire network. So I like to do a mix of conversion and conversation posts, knowing that the conversation will give me a measurable higher result. So that's my take, and let me tell you, it was fun to go through all the 90 days of content to figure that out, and then defining that objective, defining that goal. What are you trying to achieve? And I think, Patrick, I think you nailed a couple different things. Figure out what your business goals are. Figure out what your objectives are, and that will actually help you define those messages. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And we have a time check here, and so we have a lot of more content. Bryan, you and I could sit here talking probably all day about this stuff, but we're going to need to pick it up a little bit. But you're absolutely right. So let's talk about some very succinct, very specific things that you can do to make sure that you have the right content strategy in mind. Be very specific about what your objective is. What are you trying to do? articulate what success looks like, right? We'll know we're successful when, and fill that out. Be very specific about that. But then also articulate your story. What do you want employees and candidates to say about working in your company? Because this then will go to shape the content tone and the way you engage. As a matter of fact, this is Bryan. You have a couple of examples here.
Just some examples about defining messages by channel. Thinking about going beyond the job post. Pulling in cultural references, trying to make sure that you have a trackable link within whatever you're posting, but really looking at your audience. In this particular audience, we hire a lot of developers at Twilio, so this is something geared towards developers. But is your GSP code strong enough to pull the ears off a gundark? Well, most people wouldn't know what a gundark was. For future reference, this right here is a gundark. and I think the point of that is to understand that when you're talking about things that your audience cares about, you are going to be alienating some people, and that's okay. But really narrowing down that message based on the channel, based on those limitations. So, for example, I didn't list Facebook on here because developers are less active on Facebook. So we looked at Twitter, LinkedIn, and GitHub, and even used some code to reference our call to action for GitHub. So thinking about that by channel, realizing that it doesn't always have to be the same message because it's not always the same audience.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that the step of defining your target profile, right, creating an archetype of the people that you're trying to reach, then allows you to chart a course that you're going to take to get to them. Right? It's going to chart the type of content that you choose to curate, to pull in, or to create, but then also how you're going to shape the conversation that you have with them. It's going to define the content mix. Understanding your archetypes and the targets, the people you're trying to reach, right, will help you to identify the channels that they're on. Are they on Twitter? Are they on Facebook? Are they on LinkedIn or some other very specific social networks? It'll allow you to zero in on that. Your ambassadors, your employees, right? Identify hand raisers. Your employees want to share content. They want to tell their stories. So give them a voice. Activate them to as an ambassador. Pull them into the fold. Plan these things out though. And it's important that success really is predicated upon having a very focused plan. And as an old boss told me, he used to drill into me, plan the work and work the plan, and it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop here. And then finally, I would say that it's really important that you have somebody on point. This can't be somebody's night job. I think we've all probably, Bryan, you've had them, I've had them. We've all probably had those extra responsibilities to pile up without anything else being offloaded. And I know how it went for me, not very well. So this is important that you assign somebody to be on point, somebody who is focused on it, who will end up having accountability and responsibility. It doesn't have to be a full-time job, but it does need to have a home.
Yeah, we have a team.
And then,
we have a team of people that determines who owns what and who's first to act when something comes in. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, Bryan, I'm eager to see the next slide around measurement. I think you all love this, but probably the most important part of the content strategy is how you measure it. It doesn't have to be soft metrics. I think social has gotten hit because there are a lot of soft metrics, but in fact, you can actually create very hard, tangible metrics by connecting to a call to action. You can tie a direct link between all that social content conversation and directing them to a place that you can get them to take an action. So for us, we track, QSocial tracks 350 metrics across social talent acquisition, but But, if you're thinking about it, they really fall into a couple of broad categories. Reach. How many people are we reaching? Where are we reaching them, and when do we reach them? Are we growing? Where are we growing? How much volume is there of sharing? What's being shared? When is it being shared? Where? How much engagement is there? What's clicked through? Where is it clicked? What's the click-through ratio? But Bryan, I'm eager to hear your commentary on this slide right here.
So the old adage of are you involved or are you committed really plays into this slide. So measuring what kind of response you want to get from your audience. At the top, you see a like and a favorite. Those are really, fairly superficial levels of involvement. You get a little bit more involved by following something or liking a particular page, that kind of thing, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or any of the other channels. And then you really get into being committed and sharing your thoughts in a comment or a reply. Not only increases the engagement level, but it also lets people, as I mentioned earlier, it lets people within your audience's network see that they're engaging with your content. And then, not just responding, but you go one step further with a share or a repost, and that is the ultimate level of commitment because you get the most support from that. And then an example of measuring some of that is for one of the slides that I showed earlier, the conversion slide. There were a total of 846 clicks to that campaign, and we saw that about a third of them were actually from Facebook, which is the largest channel. So we knew which channel to support with the next campaign for something like that. And then to take it one step further, the actual in-person event had 42 people registered from Facebook. So really taking it to the granular level and understanding what your goal is as you're measuring is really key.
Great. Well, hopefully, Bryan and I have given you some food for thought. Hopefully we've given you a framework for structuring the content strategy and some ideas on how to convert social talent acquisition into more meaningful engagement, whether that's referrals or candidates, hopefully ultimately quality hires. This isn't a science. There is no one answer. It takes some experimentation. Twilio, I know, has been experimenting like crazy. And what works today may not work tomorrow. So you need to see what's going to work for you. With that said, Bryan and I are happy to answer your questions now, or either now or in follow-up conversation. And with that, Randy, I will turn it back over to you.
That sounds good. Thank you so much to both Patrick and Bryan for being with us this afternoon. I want to thank you for sharing your experience and your expertise with all of our HCI members as well. We have had a number of questions come in through the Q&A interface, so I'd like to get to as many of those as we can in the time we have remaining. If you have not submitted any questions yet, HCI members, you can do so now. You can do that one of two ways. You can enter any questions in the chat box. I just ask that you attach your name to the question in parentheses so we know who we're speaking with. Or you can tweet me questions with the hashtag HCI chat, and we will try to get some answers for you. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right into our first question here. And I think with this question, both Patrick and Bryan, you'll probably be able to offer some perspectives on how to handle something like this. So this question comes from Praveen in the chat. In a global setting, how can a company avoid unintentional harm due to differences in cultures, ways of thinking, values, things like that when you're posting content and what the core message of that content is across cultures?
Yeah. Well, we have a number of global clients, and their content strategy actually has multiple layers. One is at the overall organizational messaging level, which of course, telling the company story isn't going to get anybody into hot water. But as you look at kind of the more day-to-day engagement-based content, each organization, or rather each region, has their own content strategy and can have content delivered based on we call them segments, based on the individual segments. So we have, and just to carry that a little bit further, so there are feet on the street in each of those regions who then would be point on identifying and vetting content.
Yeah, I think it's important to take the content and filter it out to people on the street. In a previous life, we were recruiting in the UK and India and Canada and the US, and how that story was told varied really greatly based on the cultures and timing, and it was really beneficial to have someone who could provide that perspective and share our content calendar with that person.
Great, thank you. And this next question here may not have one answer, might have several answers, but we all know there's no shortage of social networks and channels to get this content out. I mean, Facebook and LinkedIn are just the tip of the iceberg. Do either of you have favorite channels that you really like to focus on, or if a company has limited resources, limited time, and you could pick maybe a top 5 networks to really focus on, is that something that you would be able to share with us?
So for me, it really depends on your audience. So for us at Twilio, we're heavily developer-centric. So we're going to focus more on a GitHub, Stack Overflow, those kinds of resources, as well as individual user groups, depending on the piece of technology that the audience works with. So it really all starts with your audience, and that's kind of my perspective.
Yeah, I think that's right. I absolutely agree with that. That being said, at this point for talent acquisition, 99.3, 99.5, whatever, some 99-point-something% of all activity continues to happen in the big three, in LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I think that Instagram and Pinterest are coming up fast. I think Pinterest is going to be a really interesting forum for employer branding, and for companies to showcase their employer brand. But we focus on really on the big ones. But to Bryan's point, there are some niche communities that, gosh, if you're in that market, then you need to know and harness it.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you, Bryan. We have come to the end of the hour, so we're going to wrap up our material for today. HCI members, you can feel free to head over to our social media channels. We do have a LinkedIn group discussion page and also Twitter with the hashtag HCI chat to review some of the tweets and chime in with your own thoughts on this webcast if you'd like to continue the discussion. Once again, I want to say one more thank you to our presenters, Bryan Chaney of Twilio and Patrick Rooney of QUEsocial, and also to everyone over at QUEsocial for making this webcast possible today. And lastly, of course, the biggest thank you of all goes to all of our HCI members. We appreciate all of you taking the time out of your busy afternoon to spend with us today, and we look forward to seeing all of you on another webcast soon. Thanks again, and have a great day.